Welcome to the Shy and Fearful Canine, rehabilitating shy and fearful canines in a shelter environment at Great Plains SPCA. Many people ask, why are dogs shy and fearful? And there are many reasons why animals can be shy and fearful. The biggest reasons are abuse and abandonment, environmental changes, lack of socialization, and some additional reasons we're going to discuss in a minute. So when it comes to abandonment and neglect, this causes a mistrust between an animal and their owner. Physical abuse is a type of positive punishment, which we'll talk about later. But this is another thing that causes people to have mistrust, animals have mistrust for their owners. A big one that we don't really think about is environmental changes. When these animals live in a home and they're used to living in their home and then they come to live into a shelter, they're away from their family, away from their beds, away from their routines. When they're lost and stray, that can be very scary for them. Another one that we don't really think about is that there are animals that have lived indoors their whole life, and if they go to an outdoor situation, that can be very scary for them. Along with animals that have been outdoors their whole life, when they come into an indoor home, that can be very scary for them. So some examples of that is if an outdoor dog comes to an indoor home, they hear things like phones and microwaves and television, and those things can be very scary for them. Animals that have lived indoor their whole life, if they go outdoors and they have to hear thundering or neighbors or cars, those kinds of things can be very scary for them as well. Lack of socialization is probably the biggest reason for shy and fearful animals. That is a huge one here at the shelter. And the biggest reasons for lack of socialization are usually just lack of exposure of your pet to unfamiliar things when they're younger. So real quick, some of those lack of socialization reasons can be animal hoarding, lack of exposure, like I talked about just a minute ago, fear imprinting, and puppy mills. So animal hoarding and puppy mills are kind of similar because usually you have one handler and multiple other animals. And a lot of times those animals, since they are pack animals, they get very attached to each other, but they usually don't get attached to the owner because the owner is either neglecting them or being abusive to them. So that's why a lot of times when we get animals from animal hoarding and puppy mill situations, they're very shy and fearful to humans, but they usually do well with other animals. Another one is fear imprinting. Puppies go through a fear imprinting stage between the months of 4 and 8. And this is just the time where they learn to be afraid of things. And if they are afraid, a lot of times humans, what they'll do is they'll try to start trying to pet them and hold them and coddle them to relax them so that they're not afraid. But that actually is a detriment to the puppy because you're actually reinforcing the dog to be afraid. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but that is just something to keep in mind as we're going through this training. Again, the lack of socialization, or excuse me, the lack of exposure is the biggest reason for shy and fearful animals. And that can just be adopting a puppy and keeping them in your house and in your backyard and not exposing them to new people and to new experiences and new other animals and stuff like that. So a lot of times people will say this dog is shy and fearful because they were abused. A lot of times, most times, those animals are not abused, and what it is that they're just a product of lack of socialization. Uh, and it can also be learned from the parent, which we're going to talk under the additional reasons. So the additional reasons would be dominant-based training, which is a positive punishment type of training that we do not recommend here at the shelter. The second thing would be genetic predisposition. So example, a border collie has a 2 out of 5 on friendliness with strangers. That doesn't mean that a border collie can't be friendly with people because there's lots of friendly border collies. It just means that they're genetically predispositioned to be working dogs and herding dogs and not social beings like some of our other dogs, like retrievers, for example. Another one is being learning from the mother. If you have a mother that is shy and fearful or even feral, they can teach those traits to their offspring. Another one can be physical ailments. The animals can be shy and fearful, and they want to stay away from you because you're afraid that you're going to hurt them, even though if they're already weak for whatever reason. The next thing we're going to talk about are the stages of fear. The first level, which is on the low end of the spectrum, is anxiety. The trigger does not need to be present for the dog to be anxious about it. So that could be a dog being afraid of people and people not being around, or a dog being afraid that something's going to get them or they can't get free. Those are some examples. Another one is fear. Fear is the necessary for survival. It is innate fears versus learned acquired fears. And the biggest thing for you to take away is that fear can be irrational. And a lot of times we have animals that display fear aggression because they've been positively reinforced to do those behaviors because they realize they get what they want. So for an example, if a dog is really fearful and you go up and pet it and then it growls at you, you move your hand back and you get nervous of the dog, you get scared and you don't want to get bit. So then what we're really doing is we've just taught that dog that whenever they're fearful and they growl, people are going to move away from it. So then what happens, a dog will growl, and then the growling will get louder and louder and it'll escalate. And as those behaviors escalate, the more they're getting reinforced to display those behaviors to keep people or other things away from them. Then the last part of fear is phobia. This is very, very extreme behavior. It can happen in an instant. It doesn't build up over time and may need to be treated with drugs in conjunction with behavior modification. A lot of times, behavior pharmaceuticals is something that is needed with animals with phobia. So some of the things that we talk about when introducing animals to drugs and behavior modification is, does the animal have anxiety consistently, or is this just anxiety during something that is triggering anxiety? So if the dog is displaying anxiety because there is a bunch of new people in the area, that's one thing. But if the dog is in a home and it's quiet and the dog is expressing anxiety, 10 hours a day, just pacing, and we can't understand quite what that trigger is, then that would be more severe anxiety. So just wanted to kind of talk to you about that. Anxiety, fear, and phobias are kind of the stages of fear, and that they're all, of course, all on a spectrum. So this is something that we go through and talk about as we're diagnosing the pets here at the shelter and discuss before they get put on medication. And any animal that is on behavior pharmacology or drugs for behavioral reasons should absolutely be on a behavior modification plan. I added this slide because I thought it would be good for people to understand that shy and fearful behavior is not necessarily just something that dogs do. This is a, a behavior that many animals do, especially mammals. And here's some examples of other mammals displaying the behaviors. So to the top left, you're going to see a fox displaying some shy and fearful and some submissive body language to the other fox. In the top right picture, you see a dog in 3 different poses. These are what we call appeasing signals. That is the term that was used. Now we're kind of turning them to either calming or appeasing signals. But basically, it's body language to diffuse a potentially dangerous situation for them to another animal or to a person. So if you see, again, we're talking at the top right picture. If you look at that picture all the way to the left, there's a curve. You see kind of like a humpback, kind of a C curve to the back, which you can also see in the coyote below in the bottom right photo. And you move over to the right, you see lip licking. So lip licking is an appeasing signal, and then also yawning. So those are some body languages you're going to see. We're going to talk more about shy and fearful body language in a minute, but I just wanted to share that. The picture to the left bottom, that is a dog named Georgie Porchy. The reason why he got that name is because he lived underneath a porch with a chicken. And the reason why I bring that up is that dogs are pack animals. And if these dogs are incredibly shy and fearful of humans, what they do is since they're pack animals, they usually just get attached to another type of animal, whether it be a dog or a chicken in Georgie Porchy's case. So Georgie Porchy, who lived under the porch with the chicken for quite a while, when he was removed and put into the shelter environment, he was very afraid. And I've got a video of him a little bit later on that I'm going to show you guys. So what he does is you'll see he's displaying all the behaviors, and he's even pooping, defecating when he's walking. And that's, I always try to, at what point do you feel comfortable pooping when you're walking? That you're in a very stressed state if you're doing that as a mammal. Here is the video of Georgie Porchy I was talking to you about earlier. He is the dog that was very afraid and became friends with a chicken under a porch. I took this video because I thought that it would be a really good video for many of you to see, because you can observe many of his shy and fearful behaviors. Blinking eyes, his ears are back, lip licking. You're going to see his paw go up, and he's defecating when he's walking, if you can see that right there. He is increasing distance by going to a corner that is further away from me because he's afraid of me. More lip licking. He is starting to kind of watch me at this point. And then he is done. So I thought that was just a really good video for you guys to see if you're seeing those behaviors. So just imagine, when would you feel comfortable walking and pooping at the same time? The answer is probably never. So this dog is very, very nervous if he's doing that. So these are some high stress, high shy and fearful behavior signs that I just wanted you guys to be able to watch. This is the body language of fear in dogs. If you're wondering where I got this slide, it is from the Sophia Yin website. You can go onto her website and find a lot of information from Sophia Yin, from videos to articles to slides to you name it. So I get a lot of information because I think she was really, really great in her time. So I use a lot of her information in many of my classes. So in case you're wondering, that is where I got that from. So real quick, back to body language and fear in dogs. So slight cowering versus major cowering is usually synonymous with fear versus phobia. A lot of your fearful animals have slight cowering. Major cowering can be a phobia, or it can just be severe environmental changes that causes severe fear. Some more subtle signs, as you can see, licking lips. Animals lick their lips to show other animals that they are not a threat. And a lot of times I will use the same behavior with dogs when they're fearful, and I'll lick my lips. And obviously my snout is not as big as a dog's, so I have to exaggerate it by licking my lips a lot, and I'll do really big yawns, which we'll talk about active sleeping and yawning in a second. But a lot of times I'll do those behaviors with a dog that's really fearful, and it's really cool because they will kind of be looking at me and really scared, and then I'll start yawning really big and licking my lips, and they kind of look at me and they're like, "Oh, she knows dog." For those that don't believe me, go and try it. If you see a dog that's trained fearful, start actively licking your lips and actively yawning really largely and kind of averting attention and acting aloof, and you'll see the dog will have more interest because you are demonstrating to that dog that you're trying to calm the other dog down, and that what you want is for that dog to not be a threat to you. So it kind of changes its role reversal at that point. Another one is panting. You'll see a lot of panting. A lot of times you'll hear a lot of huffing, so it'll be like a sorry if my my demonstration wasn't that great, but that is kind of similar to what I call huffing, and they'll kind of huff and they'll start running around in circles when they're doing that. Another one is brows will be furrowed, ears to the side. Another one would be moving in very slow motion. They'll engage slowly with you. They'll come close to you. Maybe they'll run away. And then back to active sleeping or yawning. Yawning is another form of an appeasing / calming signal to let someone else know that they're not a threat. And that is why they do that. A big one is hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is when an animal just cannot calm down. They cannot relax, they cannot settle, they will not lay down, and a lot of times they're doing what I call parameter checking. And what that means is when a dog is running around the fence line or around the walls and around the doors of an enclosed area. And basically, they're just checking what's coming in, what's going out, what control they have over the environment. But it's to the point where they can't relax, and that's not good. Animals that suddenly won't eat, and always make sure that if you see an animal doing this, make sure that it rule out medical first before considering it to be behavioral. But a lot of times animals suddenly won't eat when they're in severe anxiety. Same thing for humans. You'll see a lot of averting attention, which is what we call moving away, and then lots and lots of pacing. So I kind of talked about the pacing with the parameter checking and also the panting and the huffing. Another thing you might see is piloerection. Piloerection is when dogs' hackles are up. So a lot of times, this is a mixed signal for a lot of people because when they see piloerection on a dog or when they see a dog's hackle standing up, they automatically assume that the dog is being aggressive, when actually piloerection is just a form of high arousal. So what happens is the animal gets excited about something and then they display piloerection. So the reason why it's a mixed signal is because if an animal is being aggressive, piloerection is great because it's making all their hair stand up on the back of their body and it makes them look bigger and more scary. But the only thing that makes it a mixed signal is that they can have piloerection when they're really excited. It's a lot like goosebumps for humans. So when humans, we get goosebumps when we hear sad stories or when we hear really lovely stories or, or if we get scared or, it is just something that is it is definitely a mixed signal. So I just want you to know that when you're seeing that a dog. So if you see a dog with piloerection, don't always just assume that it's being aggressive because that's not a lot of times not always the case. Another subtle sign would be excessive grooming. If you see them grooming themselves a lot, this is a lot for our cats too at the shelter. We see excessive grooming is usually a huge red flag. So I'm going to show you a couple of photos of animals in different stances. This is your classic fear, aggression, defensive threat. There's a difference between defensive and offensive. Defensive would be if an animal is stuck in a corner and you're trying to engage with them and the dog cannot go anywhere and then they growl or bark or snap at you. Aggressive threat would be as if I was ignoring the dog and I wasn't doing anything and then the dog came to me and bit me. So we're going to talk about those a little bit. So this is normal stance for fear aggression. So you see the hackles are raised. We call that piloerection, which you learned in the last slide. Lowered body stance, tail will be tucked, little to no movement. That's important. Corners of the mouth will be pulled back almost to a C curvature. Lips will be slightly curled for the teeth to be somewhat visible, the nose will be wrinkled, the pupils be dilated, and the ears will be back. That's important about the ears. And the biggest way to know if an animal is being defensive or offensive is that if you see an animal displaying behavior and you step forward the dog, if you step forward towards the dog, if the dog moves away from you, it's usually defensive. If the dog comes closer to you and increases or decreases the distance between you, then it's usually offensive behaviors. So here's a picture. Here's the model of what that looks like. Here is a dog actually displaying fear aggressive behaviors. As you can see, the dog is kind of backing himself away and into a corner or an area where he's kind of able to get away. He's got that curvature C in his back. His legs are really long in the back and his legs are ready to run in the front, which gives him the ability to run away and escape from a situation, is why they're in that body stance. You can see the teeth slightly, the nose is a little wrinkled. You may not be able to tell because the photo's a little blurry. And the biggest thing is the ears are back into the side. So this is what it would look like. So if you saw a dog like this, you would absolutely not want to go towards the dog. You would want to increase distance and work on some training tips, which we'll talk about. And here is your stress and anxiety dog. So this is the dog that's got the the lowered back, the tail down, the ears back. Pupils are dilated. A lot of times you're not going to see that piloerection. You are going to see rapid panting in the corner of the mouth. And a lot of times these are the dogs that are panting heavily and doing that huffing behavior that we talked about earlier. You will also see sweating through the paws. You may not see that. It just depends on the location of the dog. But for an example, if you've ever taken your dog to a vet clinic and they're on those big steel platforms and then you see their little paw prints everywhere, it's because they've been nervous or had stress and anxiety and they sweat through their paws when they're nervous. Or it's just really, really hot. So on the bottom right, you're also going to see a picture, just kind of a dog that had some separation anxiety or maybe frustration elicited aggression, and had obviously torn something up. So that was just a little cute photo. This is what submission looks like. Submission is when an animal is trying to diffuse a potentially dangerous situation. So they are offering a lot of calming and appeasing signals to another animal or person or whatever that is causing them fear. So as you can see, when the body is lowered, the tail is down, you might have a small wag at the bottom. It just depends on the dog. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but that's to initiate some kind of a little bit of play too. Like, hey, we're cool. Melee, sweaty footprints. The paw rise is a big indicator that the dog has some submission. Dogs lift their paws up like that for a couple of reasons, and one of them is an active submission, calming, appeasing signal. Another one would be a solicitation to play towards another animal, and then another reason why they would do that is when they're hunting. If you've ever seen a dog in a point, they'll lift the paw up so they can get ready to run. So back to active submission. You'll see the ears are back, forward head is smooth, eyes and contact brief and indirect. They lick their lips frequently, and they'll even lick the face of the other animal or person if they're in the area. And a lot of times you can see the corner of their mouth back. So ideally, this is they're just trying to make themselves look small and least scary as possible to whatever the potential threat could be. And if you notice on the other slide, when we were talking about fear aggression, they're actually trying to make themselves look bigger. So this is something I always talk about in my class. If you ever see a bar fight, you'll notice like there are usually two men involved, sometimes two women. And what happens is one will be the aggressor, they'll be the offensive person. And so they're being offensive and they're growling, or not growling, they're saying maybe vulgar things, but they're trying to make if you ever look at their body stance, they're trying to make their body look bigger. They try to make themselves look taller. They try to make themselves look more muscular. It's almost like a bluff. And they'll get in your face and they'll point, maybe not your face, but the other person's face, and point their finger in their face and basically look as scary as possible. Then the other person has two options. They can go into fight or flee. So that would be offensive, or that would be defensive behavior if they fought back, right? So what they do is, so either they're brawling, they just get down with it and start fighting immediately, or they say, whoa, 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 no, I'm so sorry, and they try to avert attention. They step backwards. They try to increase distance between the aggressor. They'll try to cool things down. They try to make themselves smaller. This is essentially what dogs are doing. You have one dog that is trying to look really big and scary and piloerection, hackles up, trying to bluff the other animal. And then you've got the other dog trying to look smaller, trying to make themselves as small as possible, that they're not a threat. So that is, and most times dogs don't go straight to fighting or biting. A lot of times those are learned behaviors, or there can be, severe behavioral issues with that animal. But in most cases, you're going to see a lot of bluffing behaviors because it is a survival technique to actually not fight. Because if you get into a fight, you're going to get hurt. And if you get hurt, hurt can mean death. So a lot of times you do see a lot of bluffing behaviors. But a lot of times when animals have been reprimanded for behaviors, sometimes they start going to offer different behaviors. But that's a different discussion. We'll talk about that later. So here is a dog offering the submissive behavior. You can see she is has the C back, has the tail tucked between her legs. Legs are back stiff. She's got her ears to the side. She's licking her snout. She's doing everything that she possibly can to let this person know that she's afraid, she doesn't like it, and she doesn't want to be moved wherever this guider is trying to have her go. So now we're going to talk about fight or flight response, which I had talked about a little bit earlier in the previous slide between the fear aggressive / dominant aggression versus submissive behavior. So fight is when a dog usually has no other choice. In most cases, dogs are not going to choose to fight because as a survival technique, they're going to do better not fighting, because fighting can mean getting hurt, being hurt can mean eventual death. So fighting is usually not the case they want to go to, and a lot of times they are going to be doing a lot of bluffing behaviors. If you see a dog about to get into fight mode, it is not a good idea to grab their collar, because in that instance, a lot of times they're hyper vigilant and alert, and once you grab their collar, they will redirect and bite you on the hand. So this is a time when you would want to use a loud can, one of our shaker cans, squirt bottle, anything, food to redirect the dog away, anything like that. The other option is flight. This is usually the dog is going to take this opportunity if they can. Some dogs fight so much and they build confidence over time and then they immediately go to a fight, but in most cases that's not the case. And fighting is just a form of bluffing. They just want to bluff and scare the other animals, or it can be a hierarchy competition building thing. But in most cases, we don't want to fight, but there are a few that do because it's a learned behavior. But again, the dog is usually going to take the flight opportunity if they can. When you see dogs go into a freeze, that is because they are actually assessing the situation. They're deciding, should I fight this dog back? Is there a way I can leave? Is there a way I can get out of this without getting hurt? So this is their assessment period, and that's why they do that. Humans can identify with this usually because when they have severe anxiety, they get in a paralyzed state where they're like, what do I do? How do I handle this threat, right? And then we've got fooling around. Fooling around can appear that the dogs go into play mode, they get really excited, they're jumping, they're going into play bows, or they just start sniffing and just start just exploring their area and not really do anything, and they just kind of avoid the other animal as well. This is the canine ladder of aggression. I like to show this to everyone because ideally I would like for everyone to be able to identify what the animal they're working with is at on the ladder, and then ideally go down the ladder of escalation instead of going up, because as you can see, as you go up, you're gonna get into bite zone. So the first steps are blinking, yawning, licking nose, licking lips. So those are your appeasing / calming signals. If the dog is getting ignored and those aren't working, then they go to turns head away, averting attention. Then as you go up the ladder, you see turns body away, sits, paws, lifts the right or left paw for calming signals, and then removing the animal away, so walking away completely. Then you'll see creeps, slow movement, ears back. Then you see stands crouched, tucks tail under. Then you see lies down, leg up. And then you get your stiffens and stares. And your stiffens and stares is a pretty big red flag that you should not be engaging with the animal right now, and that you need to take a minute and to remove yourself. And I think this is the part of the ladder that a lot of people don't see. And that's when you see people like, the dog bit me out of nowhere, because they didn't see the freeze, the stiffen, the stares. Your biggest warning to a bite is usually the freeze. Next, you should be getting growls. And then after growls, then and growls is also there up there with baring teeth and stuff like that. Then after that, then you get the actual snap, Now, a lot of people say that dog tried to bite me. Dogs are incredibly accurate, and if that dog wanted to bite you, he would have bit you, or she would have bitten you. So a snap is usually just one of the ladders of correction. So they are trying to correct you to not come any nearer, and basically are saying, if you come any further, I'm going to actually bite you. The only time I think dogs don't have good aim is when they're fighting with other dogs. And then a lot of times that's why we get redirect bites, because they're actually aimed to bite whatever they're fighting, and they accidentally bite people. So that's the only time I don't think they have good aim, just because they're kind of biting at whatever at that point. And then you've got lastly your bites, and then your bites can range in a whole level of degrees of different types of bites. So if you're seeing an animal in any of these levels, ideally you want to go down, not up. Something that is important to know, that some animals will skip some of these. So example, if there are animals that won't be stiff and stare, they will not growl or snap, and they go straight to a bite. And a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times animals get reprimanded and then they go straight to a bite. So for an example, if I have a dog and someone is coming towards me, and the dog, my dog is really afraid of the person coming towards me, they'll growl, and then I'll say, "No, bad dog. No growling. You don't growl." Um, and then the next time someone comes that he's scared of, or she, the dog will not growl because they know they can't growl. So then they'll just start snapping at people. And then I say, "No, bad dog, you cannot snap. That's bad." And then the third or fourth time when they meet a new person, they say, "Okay, I can't growl, I can't snap, I can't bare my teeth." So then the dog even looks more inviting and even more friendly, because it's not displaying any of those behaviors. So then the people are like, "Oh yeah, this dog is really friendly." And then they walk up to pet the dog, and then the dog bites them, sometimes badly, in those situations. So if there's anything you could get from this training, is that I want you to understand that growling, snapping, baring teeth, those are not bad behaviors. They are good. We want the animals to give us warnings. We want to know when they are upset. We want them to communicate with us before they go to a bite. So that, if there's anything you can get from this training, it is that this is just a form of communication. It's just like humans. When humans get mad, they sometimes yell. But that doesn't mean, just because someone yells, it doesn't mean they're a bad person. It just means they're distressed. So I just want you to kind of keep that in context as you're going through the shelter and you see these animals under distress. So an important thing that we need to talk about is recognizing a dog's threshold. A lot of times animals get in their threshold, and that is what becomes an issue for a lot of dogs. So in the photo to the left, you're going to see there is a safe zone, and that is when your dog is calm and relaxed, and usually not super hypervigilant. They may look at other things, but it's not that they're looking at it in a way that it's not a threat to them. Then you've got your stimulus, and that's your not safe zone. And so that's when the dog is growling, barking, charging, um, displaying severe barrier aggression or reactivity, and that can be to men, sunglasses, other animals, storms, cars, bicycles, strollers, you name it. So ideally, we want them to stay under threshold, and then ideally work with them until they can get up to higher levels of stimuli without going over threshold. So to the right, you'll see under, at, and over. Under threshold, the dog shows no signs of fear or anxiety towards the stimulus present. So that is a great time for training. Also, you can train at threshold. This is the point at which the dog may go from showing no fear or anxiety to showing some awareness of stimulus and the beginning of hypervigilance. So this is a lot of times we're doing a lot of training at threshold or right before threshold. And we call that doing threshold work. And so, for example, that's a dog that's growling and barking at other dogs when they're walking down a street. And so we do a lot of that training under and at threshold. You cannot do any training when they're over threshold. So over threshold is when the dog shows apparent signs of fear and anxiety towards the stimulus that is present. This is a time that dogs cannot rationalize. This is a time when they're over threshold, their cortisol levels are at an all-time high. That is a stress hormone for people that don't know what cortisol is. And this is not the time to do training. So it's if you've ever been in a serious fight with your significant other or a parent or somebody, you can't just fight and start screaming at them and then me go in between you and say, okay, guys, it's fine. Calm down. That's all, that's not how it works. It takes our bodies a while to calm down and relax. So it's the same thing for them. So if you have a dog that's over threshold, you need to remove the dog away from the stimulus so the dog can calm down before you can start your training. And that is the biggest thing that I see. One of the biggest mistakes I see is when they're over threshold, a dog will be walking, they'll be growling and barking at other animals, and then people will force their dog to sit and stay in that position. And I'm always like, don't that you're just making it worse. You're causing them to become even more fearful, and you're causing flooding behaviors if the stimulus gets even closer. So remove the dog when they're over stimulus or over threshold. Calm the dog as long as it takes. It can take hours, it can take a day or two, and then start working at under and at thresholds. Also, make sure that your dog will eat or play and try to do basic commands before beginning interaction. That's important because that will let you know how your dog is truly feeling. Um, if you have a dog that's picky with treats, then obviously customize it to your animal. But a lot of times, if the animals are eating and playing, then they're ready to do some training. So, how do we interact with an unfamiliar dog? So this is what we call slow and low training. So we go slow, we stay low, and we have a neutral body stance. A neutral body stance is not looming over an animal. It's keeping a straight body, or when we're getting to the ground, we keep our back straight when we're squatting. Making sure you don't have accessories that can frighten the animal. So remember earlier I was talking about me personally yawning and licking lips. This is what we call mirroring body language. So use calm voice interactions, relaxed body interactions, and mimicking yawning and licking lips. And remember, we have to exaggerate that a little bit because our snouts are a lot smaller than a dog's. But this is effective, and absolutely try it. You will see that it is effective. No direct eye contact is incredibly important. In the wild, dogs and foxes and wolves, they're not all just staring each other down. If those dogs or wolves or foxes are staring at each other, it's actually because there's usually about to become a fight or something. So unlike humans like a lot of eye contact, and if you're talking to me and I'm not looking at you, that's considered rude. Well, in the dog world, if you're staring at each other, that's weird. The first thing you should actually do is start sniffing their butt and do inguinal sniffing in circles is the appropriate meeting. So no direct eye contact initially with a shy and fearful animal because it can be they can consider it a challenge, and it can be incredibly intimidating for these animals. Just think about the dogs in the kennels on the adoption floor. This is why we have barrier aggression in a shelter environment, because we have people coming in and staring at all of these animals in the kennels, and it is incredibly stressful. So we actually create all of our barrier aggression in the shelter. As far as movement, allow the dog to move. Give them a choice of their situation. When a dog feels like she or he can move away freely, then they're going to be more confident to approach you. Check your movement as well. And I say that because a lot of times humans will keep going forward and trying to touch animals when they're not ready. And forcing interaction is not going to work. I see this a lot in dog-to-dog interactions. I see two people. I'll see the person that's wanting their dog to get along with the other dog, and the dogs will both be nervous, and then someone will push one dog to the other dog to get them closer because they think if we push them together and they see that they're not a threat, it's going to be fine. But actually, what you just did is you caused that relationship to even take longer for trust. Just imagine if you're on a blind date and you just met someone new, and I am the waitress, and I come up and I grab both of your heads and I force you to kiss. How uncomfortable of a situation is that going to be? It's going to be much better if you guys get to know each other, talk, and then decide to kiss on your own if you want. And you don't have to, and that's fine. And I think that's what people need to understand with dog to dog introductions and animals that are shy and fearful, it's okay for them to not want to engage. In fact, if they don't want to engage and we respect that, then they're more likely to approach and want to engage at a later time. Another thing I want you to think about is touch. How much touch should you be giving them? How much pressure should you be giving them? Um, I see this a lot where animals will lay on their back and display their bellies. And when they display their bellies, it's actually a submissive behavior and they're not wanting you to pet their bellies. Um, and so a lot of times I'll see people go down and start rubbing a dog's belly and then the dog will snap at them. And then people are confused. Why did they snap at me when they wanted their belly rubbed? If you genuinely don't know if a dog wants their belly rubbed or not, a lot of times, if they're not showing any submissive behaviors, I'll just go down and rub their belly for 2 seconds. It'll be 1, 2, and then I lift up and then I watch to see what the dog does. If the dog stands up and walks away, that means they do not want their belly rubbed. If they start nuzzling me and start giving me their belly and come closer to me, that probably means that they do want their belly rubbed. So we need to just understand that these animals are autonomous creatures and they are independent thinkers, and we just need to um, be able to be flexible with that. What can dogs be afraid of? Dogs are afraid of anything. They can be afraid of people. They can be afraid of other dogs. Is it that is that a reactive dog really aggressive, or is he just really afraid? A lot of our animals with barrier aggression here at the shelter, and for people that don't know what a barrier aggression is, that means they're growling and barking behind a kennel. A lot of times that just means they're afraid and they're trying to bluff people away from them. Dogs can be afraid of touch in certain spots. We call that body sensitivity, and you will see this a lot with animals that have been in hoarding situation or puppy mills. Dogs can be afraid of sunglasses, vacuums, cleaners, backpacks, other animals, thunder, lightning, rain, water, brooms. Changes in environments and being alone are the biggest reason why we get a lot of animals return to the shelters, because they have separation anxiety or isolation distress. And that can be very scary for them. Also, cars, hoses, noises, lawn makers, hats, nails, clippings, statues, flags, umbrellas, rolling skates, shovels, towels, wheelchairs, canes, crutches, garbage trucks, baths, bathtubs, stairs, buckets, and wheelbarrows. All of those things can be really scary for animals. So I just want you to understand that anything can be a trigger for a dog with fear, anxiety, or a phobia. So just keep that in mind as when you're working with your pet. I absolutely love this slide because I don't think a lot of people understand that they're giving dominance body positioning when they're trying to interact with an animal. So if you look to the right, here's this man and he is trying to engage with this this dog. And as you can see, his head to his rump is at a forward body positioning, and a forward body positioning is considered dominance aggressive behavior. So, and what do you see the dog doing? He's looking away and he's giving a averted attention, submissive body language. You notice that's the same behavior as a German Shepherd above. See the head to the rump area. And ideally, that's why I said earlier, when you squat, you need to be in a 90-degree angle, because that is what actual a neutral body stance looks like. And ideally, if you can keep to your side, keep to your side, make yourself look smaller, it's going to be less threatening for an animal. So things to think about. I just think this really puts it into perspective, because I know a lot of people try to pet animals like this, and this actually is very scary for shy and fearful animals. I really like this. This is from Sophia Yen. I know that I had talked about her earlier, but this is it's a little bit exaggerated, but it is a way of understanding why things look scary when animals are coming in and out of a kennel. So if you notice, when dogs come out of the kennel, this is actually how I do it in the bottom left. I put a loop and I let them walk through the loop. And then once I walk through the loop, then I tighten it and I walk. It's going to be a lot less scarier for shy and fearful animals. And I understand that we ask people to go into the kennel and we ask them to do different things for certain animals, but with shy and fearful animals, I would highly recommend doing this. This is the appropriate leash. leash handling demonstration, as you can see in the video. So how do we make a dog more comfortable? What we do is we do enrichments. Here are some enrichment ideas, and any of you guys can do this for any of the animals, for your pets at home, or help with the enrichments here at the animals at the shelter. So treat dispensing toys is a great one. And the reason why this was so effective is because dogs were actually at one point had to work for their food. And working for the food was very stimulating for them, and it gave them a lot of mental stimulation. So it is very calming for them. So treat dispensing toys can be plastic bottles with treats in them where they have to bang it around to get the treat to come out. It can be Kongs with peanut butter. How I personally like to do this is I get Kongs, I put a little bit of food in there and then put peanut butter, and I put them in the refrigerator. So it takes longer for them to be able to lick the peanut butter out. If you have room temperature peanut butter, a lot of times they can just eat it up very quickly, and at least freezing it will make it last longer. Treats from the sky, that's when we walk, the staff or volunteers will walk through the kennel area, and what they'll do is they'll see a dog, and if they seem scared, they'll just throw treats into their kennel. And basically all you're doing is you're associating when someone new comes to your kennel, good things happen and you're getting treats. So you're desensitizing them to being afraid of unfamiliar people coming to their kennel, which is good because to get adopted, people are going to be staring at them in their kennels, and that can be very scary for some animals. Another one is a popsicle, and that is just we get a little cute ice cube tray and we put some treats, some gravy. Make sure you don't use anything with onions, because I know a lot of people like to use broths that have onions in them. But so dogs can't have onions, but peanut butter, anything like that, and you just freeze them, and then you can take them out of the tray and give them to the dogs as they go. Any kind of puzzle feeder, and there are millions of kinds of puzzle feeders. All you have to do is look for puzzle feeders for dogs online and you will find all of them. Make sure that you have the puzzle feeder that is most appropriate for the dog that you're working with. If you have a dog that is really intelligent, like some of the border collies, they're going to want a tougher puzzle. If you give them really tough puzzles, then they're not really working for it, and then they're not getting really much mental stimulation. So we've got some where they are serious puzzles where you have to unlock something, screw something, pick up something, and then you get the treat. And that can be really rewarding for them. But using that on a dog that is, let's say, not as intelligent as a border collie can be very defeating for them, and then they get very frustrated, and then you can actually create frustration elicited aggression because they're so angry that they can't get to the treat. So just think of that. If they look like they're engaging and having fun, that's probably a good sign. If you see that they're ignoring it, it's probably because it's too hard or too easy. And so we just have to make sure that we are using the right enrichments for the right animals. Relaxation is important. Quiet time with the dog, and that can be just going into a kennel and just petting the dog, or not even petting the dog and just sitting there and reading. I had this one dog that was really afraid of humans, and so what I did is I would just sit in the kennel and I would just start reading. I just read out loud. The dog did not care what I read. In fact, I walked through and I saw a volunteer reading recipes. This is what you do. You get your mixture and get your flour, and the dog was just listening. So anything like that was really great. Tossing treats to get the dog to realize that you are full of good things, not bad things. Using a living room area is really nice because then they can get used to more of a normal and what they would live in kind of environment instead of a sterile kennel, which is not normal for most animals to live in if they're not at a shelter. Thunder shirts are great. So to the right, you can see there's a dog with a thunder shirt. He's wearing it. Just know that a thunder shirt, a lot of times it's not for them to wear for always. It's only for them to wear when they're feeling especially nervous. So this was created for dogs that were afraid of thunders. So instead of having them wear that all the time, they should only be wearing it during the thunderstorm and then take it off. Because what happens is they get desensitized to it and then it doesn't do anything for them. T-touch, that's just types of therapy, and you can go to YouTube and look up tons of T-touch, therapy touch types of massages for dogs. It can be very relaxing. Now, if the dogs are running away or averting attention, that means they're not enjoying it. So please don't do that with those dogs. Car rides can be really fun. Just make sure that you have a tight collar and harness, that they don't get loose, and beware of thresholds because those thresholds can be really scary for them. Something really important to think about are confidence building exercises. These are games that you can play with dogs that will give them confidence. And there are a ton you can look online, but here are to name a few. Tug of war. Tug of war is a great confidence building game. Now remember that if you have a dog that is overly confident, you may not want to play that game with them because they already have that confidence. So I'll see animals with high arousal or high confidence will play tug of war, and it can turn into high arousal, nipping, biting behaviors. So tug of war is really a great game to play for dogs that need confidence, like shy and fearful or more nervous animals. Now that doesn't mean you can't play tug of war with a dog with high confidence. It just means that they need to learn how to drop it. And once they drop it, then they are learning a lot of impulse control. So that can be an important game for them too, as long as we're playing with it appropriately, so that no one is getting nipped on their hands while they're playing the game. Another game is the name game, and that's as simple as it sounds. You say their dog's name, they look at you, you get a treat. Or excuse me, they get a treat, not you. They get a treat for when they recognize their name, and it's just teaching them how to recognize their name. Um, and names change. It's not a big deal, but it is a fun little activity that they can learn, and it'll be fun for them. Another one is called Six Interesting Things. This is a game I like to play. What you do is you get six interesting things, and ideally these are things that they have never interacted with before, and you show them to the pup or to the fearful animal and see how they interact. So usually I do like to do one thing that's organic, so maybe a walnut. Um, then I do like maybe like a little one of my kids' toy boats, or a leaf, or a phone, or just a bunch of different things like that. And what I do is I just show them, and so they interact with it and see what they do with it. Now, of course, if it's a phone, I'm not going to let them chew on it, but I let them hear the sound or something like that. If the animal is interested and wants to engage with it, then they get rewarded and you pet them and say, good job. If they do not want to engage with it, then you just take it away and give them another item. Once you've played this game a few times, it's really funny because the dogs get really excited because they know how the game works. And eventually they just want you to throw out everything out at once. And so I will do that. I'll get a little bag and I'll throw all six things out at once, and they'll all just start sniffing everything immediately at once. So it's a fun little game you can play. Touch game, basically you touch the dog, they get a treat. This is a great game for really shy and fearful dogs because we want to teach them that touch is okay and that good things are going to happen when touch happens. But you do need to pay attention to like how much you're touching them, where you're touching to them. If you are touching them, how are they responding to that, and making sure that you're just doing the right thing. Another thing, reading to them or checking your email. I get a lot of people that need to sit in their office and check their email. Like, just take your laptop into a kennel and just read, maybe not read your emails, but you can just kind of talk to them while you're checking your emails and giving them attention, but also ignoring them too, so that they have some space, but they're getting used to people being around them. So just an idea. Agility training, this is so much confidence building. Whenever they feel like they've learned a new trick and then they're able to do it on command, they get very invigorated by this, and it's really adorable how excited they get by that. Canine camp, just different types of public training is basically what that is. It's just canine camp is when volunteers go to a training session with dogs here at the shelter and they work with them on training. Play groups, please do not engage or do play groups if you are not trained. And if you want to be trained, let the behavior team know because we do have play group training. But that is where dogs are playing in groups with other dogs. The nose game, it's basically all they do is they touch your hand with their nose and they get a treat. And then ideally you start moving your hand in different places and they have to move to touch their snout on your hand. So fun little games. Remember, reward for good behavior. Do know that coddling animals, I put this in here because I think this is really important because I see this a lot. When animals are really nervous, people will start coddling and petting them. But when you're doing that, you're only rewarding them and letting them know that they should be fearful. So if you have an animal that is scared of thunderstorms, for example, you shouldn't be holding them and coddling them because that's only making them, think that they're doing the right behavior. So something I did with my own dog is that every time at thunderstorm, I'd grab a tennis ball and I'd start trying to play with the ball. And at first she looked at me like I was bonkers. She's like, I'm not playing ball. It's thundering. I'm scared.
But eventually I just kept saying, do you want to play fun? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do this? Let's do this. Blah, 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 blah. You know, and before you know it, she actually got excited. Now when there's thunderstorms, she grabs a ball and goes down to the basement and plays with her toys down in the basement by herself. Because dogs are associative learners and they are going to learn new patterns if you allow them to. So things to think about. And always remember to reward for good behavior. This is so important because so many times we tell people, or excuse me, we tell animals when they're doing something wrong, but we don't tell them when they do something right. And rewarding them for when they're doing the right thing is going to cause them to want to repeat that action and to want to do good things again. So make sure that you do that because that's really important. Here are some friendly, helpful tips when working with shy and fearful animals. Remember, hiding pain is a survival technique. And I bring this up because you will see a lot of animals with body sensitivity. And sometimes we don't know if it's actual body sensitivity because they're not used to touch or if they're actually in pain. So please keep that in mind. So if you're petting a dog and they have body sensitivity, it could be pain related. So please know that that is something that they do. Another thing, do not force interaction. I know this is difficult because we want animals to love us so much, but forcing interaction only causes them to trust you even more, and it takes even longer for them to get comfortable with you. So please, 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 do not force interaction. Some people will come up to me and say, how did you get this dog to like you? And I'll say, I ignored the dog for 2 hours. And people think I'm joking, but that is true. I ignored the dog until the dog is ready to solicit attention from me. Once they start soliciting attention, because they trust me, that is when I interact with them, and it causes so much trust between me and that animal. So also know that timing is everything. This is really important because dogs get very confused about when to do something or not to do something, and this is one of the biggest issues we have in training classes. Will reward at the wrong time. So, for example, if a dog does a sit, and then I say good, and then I go grab a treat, and the dog is looking out the window, then I give him a treat. The dog actually associates the treat with looking out the window. So the next time I say sit, the dog will start looking out the window, and then he'll be confused why he doesn't get a treat. So keep in mind that training is timing is everything. So you want to make sure that you're able to reward them the second that they do something right so that they can associate that correctly. Remember slow and low training. We talked about that earlier. If you need to review that, feel free to go back to the previous slides. Rewards can be anything. I say that because a lot of shy and fearful animals don't feel comfortable eating immediately, and they don't want treats because they're nervous and they have anxiety. So remember, toys, games, attention, play, anything can be a reward for a dog. Also remember, small increments of training is really important for shy and fearful animals. We do not want to overwhelm them and we do not want to overstimulate them. So I normally, if I have an animal with severe fearful behavior, I only work for them for 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, and that's it. Some of my more mild dogs, maybe 10, 15, and I don't really do more than 20-minute training sessions for any dogs because then they get bored or they want to do something else, or it's like when you're in a class, a lot of times you pay attention really well for 20 minutes, and then after that, it's all like, bleh, you just get tired and you start paying attention to other things. So it's the same thing. Another one is don't forget to mirror body language and to communicate that you're not a threat to the animal. That's going to really help. And then always use plenty of high value treats. A high value treat is a treat that is delicious. It usually smells really gross. They follow their nose more than they do their taste. So a high value treat is just something that they really, really want. The more high value that treat is, the more they're going to be willing to work with you. Another thing is remember that progress is progress. No matter how little that progress is, it is still progress, and that is what we're wanting. We're wanting an uphill to see progression and not regression. So please keep that in mind. Some more helpful tips that will help you while you're working with shy and fearful animals. One is to just to think about the vocalization that you're using when working with pets. So your tone of voice can be very important because I see a lot of volunteers get really excited when they see dogs and they will talk in a high-pitched kind of baby voice, and that can actually be kind of terrifying for some dogs, especially very shy and fearful dogs. So I would recommend using low, calm voices like the one I'm using right now.
just to keep them calm when you're interacting with them. It really is important that you pay attention to your tone of voice. Now, there are some dogs that really like that baby talk and they get really excited and will start doing play bows and all of those things. And for those that don't know what a play bow is, that's when they kind of run to the ground and kind of throw their both front feet low to the ground and have their head low. And it's basically just a solicitation for play for other animals or people. And if you see that, then that is fine. You can do the baby voice with those dogs. But when working with Shy and Fearful, it is recommended to have kind of a monotone, um, calm voice. That's going to really help them. Another thing I wanted to talk about was instant versus latent gratification. Many of us want to volunteer because we love pets, and having that instant gratification of a pet liking you or loving you is what drives us to want to volunteer more. So this is the difference between shy and fearful pets. When we have shy and fearful animals at the shelter, we actually get more of the latent gratification. So we really do need to give them their space, let them make their choices. They are autonomous creatures, and we want them to feel comfortable and come to us. We are doing a lot of ignoring them at the beginning, and if they solicit attention, that is when we return the favor by interacting with them. So you will get more latent gratification, and that can be hard for some people. And if you want that instant gratification, then shy and fearful pets are more than likely not the dogs or cats that you should be working with. Um, so it's just something to think about. So here are some terms that I discussed earlier in the class, and I just wanted to make sure that you guys knew what some of these things meant. So as far as dominance theory, it basically assumes that most unwanted behaviors, such as aggression, is due to dog trying to be dominant or wanting to be alpha dog in a pack. Therefore, dominance theory suggests that the way to solve many behavioral problems, such as aggression, is to establish dominance as a pack leader over the dog. I personally do not use this. This an effective and not a very researched type of theory or training. For those that are more interested in learning about why I feel that way, there is a really great book that you can read by Barry Eaton. It's called Dominance in Dogs, Fact or Fiction. And it's really great book because they talk about a lot of the things that we think are dominant behaviors really aren't, and then they kind of discuss why they are. And this person just did a lot of research with Nicole Wild, who also did a lot of research on actual wolves in the wild. So, for example, many of us thought that dominant or alpha dogs eat first. So I see this a lot where people will adopt a dog, they'll take it home, and they'll let what they want their alpha dog to eat before the other dog. And this is actually just silliness. So in the wild, the if they have kills, the breeders actually get to eat first before the alpha dogs, or wolves or foxes, and that's because they want the breeders to be able to continue breeding and carrying on their legacy. And if they have a huge kill, then they'll all eat communally. So that is just one of the reasons why it's debunked. Another thing is I've seen where people will say, well, you have to walk in front of the dog, but that's actually not the case in the wild either. They actually meander when they walk. They don't walk in straight lines in front of each other, or one doesn't stay always in front of the other. They just meander all the time. That's why it's so difficult to teach dogs how to walk on a leash. One of the more difficult things is because it's just not a natural thing for them. So those are just things to think about. And that is some of the reasons. Some of the few reasons why I actually do not buy into the dominance theory training. But I highly recommend that book if you're interested. It's a phenomenal book, and they really go really into depth in a lot of those things. Another thing I wanted to talk about was desensitization and counter conditioning versus flooding behaviors. I know that I had mentioned flooding behaviors or flooding animals. So flooding just means that if, like, let's say a person is afraid of spiders, that would basically be putting them in a room with tons and tons of spiders around them, touching them, and that is what we call flooding. So flooding is not my preferred method for training. I like desensitization and counter conditioning. Since animals are associative learners and they learn in patterns, this is actually quite easy in a lot of cases, as long as you have the right environment and the tools, I should say. But what you do is desensitize them slowly over a period of time and then counter condition them
to deliver a different behavioral response to whatever triggering thing that can be scary for them. So the only time I actually use flooding behavior, or excuse me, not flooding behaviors, the only time I use flooding method of training is when we have animals that are resource guarding toys. If they have if they have a bunch of, if they're start resource guarding toys, sometimes I will give them a whole bunch of toys. So they have too many toys to guard, so they become less important. But that's the only time I use flooding. Which is obviously different than if the dog has a phobia or a fear of something. So I never use it in that response. Another thing that I had talked about earlier is a shake off. If an animal, if I ever say shake off, or if you ever heard that term, it's also called an adrenaline shake. It just means that when an animal has had too much stimuli and it can be kind of nervous for them, and they'll just shake their whole body. And it's basically just shaking off the adrenaline, shaking off the stress, and going forward. So that is what that means when you hear that. You just kind of like, oh, okay, it's all done, it's off me, almost. So those are important for dogs to have, and it does signify to other animals that they're nervous and they don't like the whatever situation they're in. So I hope you have found these tips helpful, and I'm so glad you enjoyed the class, or I hope that you enjoyed the class. So thank you for being a part of this. Here are some of the sources that I've cited that I wanted to share with you. Actually, a couple of them I didn't cite, but I actually just put on here anyway so that you could check out if you wanted to. But some of my favorite trainers is Patricia McConnell and Dr. Sophia Yen. So those are some of my favorite ones. So please check out these websites if you want to know more information about any of the information we went over, or shy and fearful behavior. They also have a lot of confidence building games and other things that you can look up. So please feel free to check out these sources. They're really awesome. So, and you'll learn lots. I want to thank you guys so much for joining me for the Shy and Fearful Canines at Great Plains SPCA training. If you have any questions at all, please let me know. My name is Ashley Flores, and I'm the Director of Animal Behavior and Training at Great Plains SPCA. You can email me at aflores@greatplainspca.org. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions at all, and I look forward to working with you at Great Plains.